Thanks for joining us inside the Dancer's Studio, where we bring listeners like you closer to the creative process. Inside the Dancer's Studio is a program of the National Center for Choreography in Akron, Ohio, as part of our Ideas in Motion initiative. This episode was recorded as an ongoing documentation practice with NCCAkron visiting artists in 2023 to 2024. Today we join Christy Bolingbroke, our Executive Artistic Director, in conversation with Miami, Florida-based choreographer and dancer Pioneer Winter. Recognized in Dance Magazine's 2019 25 to Watch, he directs Pioneer Winter Collective, a contemporary dance and physical theater company of allied bodies who democratize performance in public spaces, museums, stages, and film. He develops work through local engagement practices with emerging LGBTQ artists and intergenerational labs and social activities with Lambda Living, a service program for LGBT elders. Outside of his company, Winter teaches in areas of social justice and art, epistemology, and dance at Florida International University.
How or when did you decide to become a choreographer? Was it a moment? Was it a strike of lightning? I'm always curious how all of a sudden we sort of step into these roles and positions.
I never considered dance. I've never not been dancing, though. And I never considered it as a career, especially not choreography. I remember my comeback to my high school dance teacher whenever she would give me a correction was like, well, I'm going to be an attorney. I know I wanted to be a divorce attorney at the time. It was one of those things where dance was always there, and I never turned and looked at it and said, oh, but this is the one thing I can't not have. And so the first time I knew I wanted to choreograph was when I realized that there were dances out there that I wanted to be in, but maybe geographically, this wasn't where they were being made at the time. And so I wanted to answer those questions for myself. I firmly believe that the reason why I choreograph is to make order out of the chaos for myself. And so in 2010, I made my first work, and it was focused on reducing HIV stigma. At the time, I was getting a master's in public health. And that entire process was just so cathartic. And that entire process, realizing just like what the arts can do and how maybe the dances that I had been part of as a dancer were maybe a little superficial, but that's not the work that I wanted to make. And that I didn't want to just make decorative dance, that I wanted to be able to change my life through the people I was meeting and the people I could be in community with. And so reaching the surface, 2010 was when I realized, this is it. This is what I want.
I mean, it's so beautiful, too. You had alluded to answering the questions on your own terms, or especially if you didn't see that was happening where you were based at the time. And was that in Florida?
Yeah, I was in Florida, and at the time I was dancing in some pickup companies, Horton-based, Graham-based, South Florida contemporary dance companies, ballet, modern, jazz. I'd grown up in a recreational dance studio where this was about like community, and it was about the recreation of dance and not like the competition of it or even the career path of it.
So what I was going to offer too is that you became the change you wanted to see. You wanted to create the opportunities to address questions, I love this, distinction to not just make decorative dance. And so with that in mind, where do you start? Is it with an idea? Is it with a question? Is it with a certain passion or a theme? How do you begin?
Sometimes it's a name. Sometimes it's a quote. Sometimes it's a position of the body. Sometimes it's an image that only I can see, and maybe it's the endpoint image, and then I work backwards from that. there are a lot of prompts and questions. I think one of my most repeated questions in rehearsal is what if, or I wonder. It always starts off with really intense curiosity. I think I let dances sit for a while before they're made, sometimes for years, where they just occupy like my daydream. And then eventually it gets to a point where they bubble up enough that they can't be ignored anymore, or maybe this is the right time. I find that dances happen when they're meant to happen. And being okay knowing that this dance exists, even if it's just in my mind, and knowing that eventually when the time is right, that work will surface.
Mm. And you have worked with percussive movers, you have worked with singers, you've worked with original composition, maybe a little digital EDM or disco. How would you describe your dance-making relationship to sound, to music?
They're so tied. I do have to say, as a dance maker, the challenge of folks thinking that dance can't exist without music, I feel like that makes dance this lesser art form. And so I don't think that dance needs music. I think dance can inspire music. I feel like the sonic elements of movement, the effort of it, the breath, the voice, the weight of the body, the way it tumbles through space, the sounds it makes when it comes down, the way it resists gravity, all of that is sound. And I've been really fortunate to work with some amazing sound collaborators, Uri Koij, Diego Melgar, Danny Amaro, Awesomer McCoy, and they've all had an element of what I see as choreography in their compositions. And so it's about, I guess, seeing the movement in each other. It's really important to me that the sound is in collaboration with the performers, because so much of the choreography is, but if the sound isn't, then it's like this sort of veil between the sound and the performance itself.
You've sort of alluded to this with the original sound composers and how you are working collaboratively with the performers too. What do you look for in dancers or collaborators?
I look for intense curiosity. When I say what if, I want the eyes to light up also and say, yeah, what if we tried it this other way? What if we asked just one more question? Reliability, consistency, access to vulnerability, especially access to vulnerability in a way that is not for an audience, but present in the rehearsal process, that it's not this sort of performative vulnerability, but it's an availability to giving your entire self to the process. I have to say that curiosity and reliability are two of the biggest things you need in order to establish that trust and that bond in rehearsal. And I don't operate from auditions. I've learned my lesson with that I need to know someone.
One of the things I notice and appreciate about your work is that it is very multi-generational as well. Can you talk about how that is a part of how you seek out and collect the people that you choose to work with, or if that's also part of how you're casting and developing your casts?
I think audiences want to see themselves on stage. I think that while we can be enamored with superhuman feats that dancers are so apt to do, I'm curious how we can find out that superhuman quality, that virtuosity, in other ways outside of just what we would consider to be the mainstream. I want to find out that hidden dance. I want to pull dance out from, everybody contains dance, every single body. And we've only kind of been led to believe that certain bodies dance because of the way dance has been codified and kept exclusive. So, the idea of a multi-generational dance company has always really been baked into the cake, even since 2010. You know, I established Pioneer Winter Collective in 2016, and we've always been physically integrated. We've always been intergenerational, and it's not only in the work and the makeup of who's in the studio, but also the way we reflect mentorship and that lived experience, even in the way the company is run. And I think that's very much thanks to like what I learned through the CAR and NCCAkron too.
The Creative Admin Research Program often is predicated on the idea of how do you like to work in the studio, and then can we build out administrative practices? It sounds like also company management practices that mirror that way of working. Focusing on your movement making, I am curious if you could talk to us a little bit more about how do you navigate between 20th century movement. You alluded to you'd been doing some Horton work or some Graham work, and then what it is to be a 21st century dance maker. I'm very curious, since we, in today's ecology, we have fewer codified single choreographer techniques that are being perpetuated. And so I'm curious, as you're sort of building the future of dance, how you're navigating that.
Yeah, that's an awesome question. Yeah. I've trained in a lot of different dance forms, so all of them inform the work. I try to sort of take a dance theater approach to the work, that it's by any means necessary. So what is the cadence? What is the movement? What is the voice that is going to speak best in this moment, in this way, in this situation on stage? Is it flamenco? Is it step? Is it tap? Is it a lap dance? Is it an arabesque? But why do an arabesque unless you're going to comment on that arabesque? So I'm looking for dances that haven't been made yet. There's a choreographer, Michael Klein, that I was fortunate to work with in my MFA program, had this idea of the excavation, and this excavation being an assumption of something being there already. Like you don't go looking for dinosaur bones unless you have a really good idea that they might be there, And I feel like it's the same way with choreography, that we go looking for something with the intention of knowing that it's there, or rather the embrace of knowing that it's there, because it can be so frustrating sometimes, and we sometimes lose our sense of direction. But I'm finding more and more that we go through that so many times with every single piece, and we just have to remind ourselves, you felt this before. The dance is there, and you just have to keep digging.
I'm thinking back to what you had said about every dance happens when it's meant to happen. And then there's the world that we have to live and operate in, and its deadlines. And so I'm curious, when you're trying to operate in that spacious environment and let the dance unearth and reveal itself, but maybe you have a deadline looming, we've got a premiere date or a show date or a tech rehearsal, that in itself can be a driving force. But if you find yourself in a creative rut, do you have any practices or approaches that you take to sort of circumvent those or move through them in a way? What do you do in those moments as a maker?
Well, recently I've taken more to writing and just allowing myself to jot down what I'm feeling in that moment. Maybe if the choreography isn't coming out, I write down, I describe it. Maybe we need to take a break from it. Maybe we step away. I have to say that I've been trying a bunch of different ways of choreographing. Normally, and historically, I've done long periods of creation where we're maybe only meeting once or twice a week, but for several months. And more recently, I've had really positive experiences doing these short spurts, these sort of bubble residencies. And I used to carry a lot of fear with that, because that's putting a lot of pressure on us to create something in a short amount of time. but it's that intensity and that intensity of focus and setting aside time to know that that's all you have to worry about. Like, I found that that's been really helpful. As far as different roadblocks, I kind of have a rule for myself that, like, let's say I'm working on a grant and I'm getting frustrated, and if one of our dogs comes up to me and wants to be pet, stop what I'm doing, turn and spend some time playing with this dog, or go outside and get some sun. Get a different sense other than just the question that's sort of looming.
Understanding more about what you value in the creative process and often asking the question, what if, is also a set of muscles or skills with how to continue to navigate through the process. Not just when you're focusing on the task at hand, but it sounds also like, what if I pet the dog? What if, we look at this in a different medium? And staying open to that is an ongoing practice.
Absolutely. And I'm even learning that, like, the dance studio where we rent space at now, it's a double garage behind someone's house. And I love having the garage door up because the backyard's right there, and the hibiscus and the mangoes, and they have 2 dogs. It's just very homey. And I'm like, I don't need to be at this big theater where it takes me 20 minutes to get from my car to the studio door because I have to go through security and all these hallways. And, like, if I leave something in the car, I can run out in my socks and go get it. Like, there's a freedom and a homeliness to it that allows us to be even more vulnerable than we normally can be.
If someone were to be approaching you, one of your students or otherwise, in this idea of making a creative life, a creative career, what advice would you want to pass on to them? Or what's the best piece of advice that you yourself have received?
I would say the best advice is to know when to say no, to know when something is not for you, to know when something goes against your principles. Also, to be decisive. And there's a difference between, like, being rude and just being clear. And that no is a full sentence. I guess my advice to other people would be to seek out virtuosity outside the mainstream. That there are a myriad of ways that we can appreciate someone's strength, someone's power, someone's potential, in more ways than just maybe obvious physical expressions of strength. And so I want to, rewrite what virtuosity is and what is it that we value in a performance and in a performing body. With the expanding of the definition of all that dance is and can be, can't we also be expanding the definition of what makes us go, wow?
Inside the Dancer Studio Conversation Series is supported by NCCAkron, the University of Akron, the University of Akron Foundation, the Mary Schiller Myers Lecture Series in the Arts, and Audioteca, a global audio manufacturer with U.S. headquarters in Northeast Ohio. Our podcast program is produced by Jennifer Edwards. James Sleeman is our editor. Transcription by Arushi Singh. Theme music by Flaco Torres. Cover art by Micah Krause. Special thanks to Laura Alicott, Sarah Durham, and Will Blake. To learn more about NCCAkron, please visit us online at nccakron.org and follow us on Instagram or Facebook at NCCAkron. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and we encourage you to subscribe on your favorite podcast streaming platform by searching for Inside the Dancer Studio. Thanks for listening, and stay curious.